Ever think about how a flower could be like a piece of living history?
Hmm. Interesting.
We're going back in time today, back to Tudor and Stuart England,
Okay.
to see how flowers were way more than just pretty decorations. They were like these big symbols of power, and status, even like imperial ambition.
I see. Yeah. It's amazing how important flowers were back then. They were everywhere. In
Exactly.
their art, clothing, politics, you name it.
To help us kind of like navigate this whole world of flowers, we've got some amazing insights from this podcast with Susanna Lipscomb and
Uh,
Susanna Lyon.
okay.
And they're like the experts, on all things flowers in those times. So get ready to like totally change the way you see flowers.
Sounds good.
When we talk about Tudor England and flowers, one flower really pops into mind, right?
The Tudor rose.
Exactly, the Tudor rose.
Yeah, it's much more than just a pretty flower, It symbolizes this huge moment in English history, the end of the Wars of the Roses. Think about it. Decades of these brutal fights between the houses of York and Lancaster. Each one had a rose as their symbol. White for York, red for Lancaster.
Got it. So where does the Tudor rose like fit into all of this?
Well, when Henry VII, a Lancastrian, defeated Richard III
Right.
at the Battle of Bosworth Field, he married Elizabeth of York.
Smart move.
Yeah, it was a genius way to unite the two houses that had been at war
Yeah.
and to really show this new unity and make his claim to the throne even stronger. He created the Tudor rose,
I see.
which is this beautiful mix of the red and white roses.
Like a peace treaty, but made of flowers.
Exactly. But, Henry's claim to the throne, it wasn't all that secure. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah, that's right.
He was smart, though, a real strategist. He knew that winning battles wasn't enough to make his dynasty last.
Yeah.
He needed a strong image, something that would make people believe in him and his rule, and that's exactly what the Tudor rose did.
So how did he use this new symbol? Did everyone suddenly start wearing rose-shaped clothes or what?
He used it everywhere, I mean it. Manuscripts, tapestries, royal seals, even engraved on swords.
Right.
Yeah, it was a constant reminder, like a visual one, of the unity he'd brought and the strength of his dynasty.
Talk about a PR campaign. And what about Elizabeth I, his daughter? She also had some issues with people questioning if she should be queen, right?
Absolutely. And she was smart, just like her father. She used the Tudor rose throughout her time as queen.
Interesting.
Yep, you can see it in her portraits, in her coronation celebrations, even woven into the clothes she wore. It wasn't just about her family's right to the throne anymore. It was about the stability and prosperity she wanted for England while she was queen.
So the Tudor rose wasn't just a pretty flower. It was this powerful tool the Tudors used to solidify their power and build up their image.
Exactly. And it's not like they were the only ones using flowers this way. Back then, flowers were like dynastic logos.
Aha.
Yeah, you had the fleur-de-lis for France, the lily for Florence, orange blossom for the House of Orange. It was like branding for royal families.
Like each royal house had its own flower logo. That's cool.
Right. And England, under the Tudors, they were often portrayed as this garden paradise, which sent a message of stability and abundance under their rule.
Speaking of abundance, let's talk about how these flowers weren't just, symbols in portraits and on flags.
Yeah.
They were woven into everyday life.
Absolutely. We see this in the New Year's gift rolls from Elizabeth I's time.
Yeah.
These rolls were very detailed and listed every gift exchanged at court. You'd find these fancy embroidered purses and sweet bags decorated with flowers.
Wow.
And they'd often be filled with fragrant petals, tapestries, bed hangings, even clothes. They were all decorated with elaborate floral designs. It was a sign of luxury, like a way to show off your wealth and status.
I could picture those huge tapestries with intricate flower designs in these big halls,
Yeah.
filling the air with their scents.
And it wasn't just about the way they looked and smelled. They would actually scatter fresh flowers on the floor just for the fragrance.
Really? Flowers on the floor?
Yes, although some visitors from Europe were a bit shocked by it. They thought it was a bit much, even unhygienic.
I guess it's all about perspective, right?
Hmm.
What's considered luxurious for one person could be too much for another. But all this talk about flowers and fragrance kind of paints this romantic picture of Tudor England.
Yeah.
But it wasn't all sunshine and roses, was it? There's this darker side to this flower obsession, especially as we move into the 17th century.
Unfortunately, you're right. The desire for exotic flowers, for new and rare varieties, played a part in colonialism and the slave trade.
How are flowers connected to these darker things?
It's not always easy to find a direct connection, but we know that flowers traveled as goods on slave ships,
Right.
were traded at places where slaves were bought and sold, and growing them often relied on the plantation economy, which was built on the forced labor of enslaved people.
It reminds you that beauty, even the beauty of a flower, can come at a terrible price.
Exactly. There's this book from the 1650s by Richard Legan about Barbados, and it shows this complicated relationship. He talks about these beautiful new lilies he found on the island, but at the same time, he's promoting Barbados as a profitable place for sugar production,
Right.
completely ignoring the suffering of the slaves working on those plantations.
It's like he's blinded by the pretty flowers and doesn't see the human costs.
Yes, and this commodification of both flowers and people, it's very clear in paintings from the 17th and 18th centuries.
Mhm.
You'll see these wealthy white women with black servants, often children, holding baskets of flowers.
Yeah, I've seen those.
And it suggests that both are seen as resources taken from overseas, possessions to be admired and exploited.
It's a disturbing connection that makes you really think about the stories behind the objects and images we see.
Exactly. It reminds us to always look deeper, question what we're told, even when it comes to something seemingly innocent like a flower motif. There's often more to the story than we initially see.
Speaking of stories, let's talk about tulip mania. That time in the 17th century when people went crazy for tulips.
Oh,
It's often talked about as just a crazy economic bubble, but I think there's more to it, don't you?
absolutely. Tulip mania wasn't just people making bad investments. It tells us something about human nature, our desire for the exotic and rare, our need to possess things that are beautiful and exclusive.
So what was it about tulips that made people go so crazy?
Well, these weren't just any tulips. They were newly brought over from Turkey with bright colors and patterns that no one in Europe had ever seen before.
Oh, wow.
They became the ultimate status symbol. The high prices weren't just because of market speculation, it was also because it was difficult and expensive to get and grow these rare flowers.
It's that everyone wanted to be in on this exclusive club, to own a piece of this exotic beauty. It's not that different from today when people spend tons of money on designer handbags or the latest gadgets.
Exactly. It's about status, showing that you can afford something rare and desirable. And this desire wasn't just for the rich. The popularity of Indian textiles with their vibrant floral patterns like chintz and calico shows that even those who couldn't afford fancy embroidered clothes wanted a touch of the exotic and fashionable in their lives.
It's amazing how this desire for the exotic and beautiful transcends time and social class. It's like we all have this innate need to connect with nature, to bring a bit of its beauty and wonder into our lives. Like the way houseplants are so popular now.
That's a great point. There's definitely a connection there, this timeless longing for a touch of nature's beauty and the status that can come with it. But in Tudor and Stuart England, flowers weren't just for show. They were also incredibly practical.
Oh, right. I forgot about their uses in food and medicine. It's easy to get caught up in the beauty and symbolism, but they were really a part of everyday life back then.
Absolutely. They used flowers in their cooking and medicine all the time, and this knowledge was passed down through generations. Herbals, which were super popular in those days, played a big role in spreading this information.
So those herbals were like the WebMD of their time.
That's a great way to put it. They were a mix of practical advice, folklore, and traditional remedies, all focused on the power of plants, especially flowers.
So it's not like people suddenly became interested in herbal medicine during this time. It's more that this knowledge was already there and became more accessible because of these herbals.
Exactly. The printing press played a huge role in making those herbals available to more people, which then influenced cultural practices and beliefs about the power of plants. It's amazing how technology, even back then, could change how people connected with nature.
This is all so fascinating. We've only just started to explore flower culture in Tudor and Stuart England. We've talked about the Tudor rose, how flowers were used as royal propaganda, their place in everyday life, and even their link to darker things, like colonialism. I'm already blown away by how deep and complex it all is.
And we haven't even gotten into the specifics of how they used flowers in their food and medicine or the art that brought these flowers to life. Trust me, there's so much more to discover.
Well, listeners, you heard it here first. We're just getting started with this deep dive into this amazing world of flower culture, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. We'll be back in a moment to delve even deeper into this fragrant and fascinating world. Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay with us.
And we're back. for more of our deep dive into flowers in Tudor and Stuart England.
Okay.
We've learned so much already, but there's still so much more to uncover, like so many more petals to unfurl, if you will.
I like that.
So we've talked about the symbolic power of flowers, right?
Yes.
But now let's get into their more practical uses.
All right.
Remember those herbals we talked about? Those weren't just pretty books about gardening.
Right.
They were like medical encyclopedias of the time, filled with information on how to use plants, especially flowers, for all sorts of healing and stuff.
Exactly. And it wasn't just like professional doctors who used this knowledge.
Yeah.
Everyday people relied on those herbals for home remedies, for all kinds of things.
So what kind of remedies are we talking about? Did they actually work, do you think?
Well, we have to remember that their understanding of medicine was very different back then.
I can imagine.
Yeah, some remedies were based on centuries of observation and experience, and those might have had some real benefits.
Okay.
But others were more based on folklore and superstition.
Makes sense.
Oh,
I can just imagine those kitchens back then with all sorts of crazy concoctions brewing.
oh, absolutely. And, flowers weren't just for medicine. They were a big part of their cooking, too.
Oh, yeah, that's right. We talk about using tulips in cooking, which is still kind of mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, it does seem a bit strange to us now, right? But they saw things differently. Tulips were exotic and precious, so using them in food was a way to, show off their status and refinement.
Like a delicacy. But tulips weren't the only flowers on the menu.
Oh, no, not at all.
So besides tulips, what other kinds of flowers were they putting in their food back in Tudor and Stuart times?
Well, they had adventurous palates, let me tell you. Violets, gillyflowers, roses, lavender, borage, rosemary.
Wow, that's a lot of flowers.
Yeah, and cowslips. And even peas and primroses.
And they weren't just sprinkling them on for decoration.
No.
They were actually using flowers as a main ingredient.
Exactly. These flowers weren't just pretty garnishes. They were used in conserves, syrups, tansies. Those are like omelets.
No, interesting.
They were in tarts and fried dough balls, even in pickles and sauces. And yes, sometimes as garnishes for meat, too.
So it wasn't just about the taste. I bet the visual aspect of using flowers was important, too.
You're absolutely right. Many recipes from that time emphasized preserving the color and fragrance of the flowers, not just the flavor.
So they were basically creating edible works of art.
In a way, yes.
We talked earlier about how flowers were symbols of power and status. Did that play a role in their dining, too?
Oh, definitely. Especially during the reign of Charles II, the Restoration period.
Right, the Restoration, a time for celebration and, as we've learned, a big comeback for floral extravagance.
Exactly. When Charles II came back to the throne in 1660 after all that turmoil and civil war,
Right.
flowers took on a whole new meaning. They symbolized renewal, the restored monarchy, and a hopeful future for England.
And this wasn't just in art and decorations, right? It sounds like food became a way to express those feelings, too.
Precisely. There's this striking example from a cookbook published right after Charles II returned. It has a recipe for a springtime salad, but it's not your average salad.
Let me guess. It was fit for a king.
More like a spectacle, actually. The recipe tells you to make a wax model of a castle and cover it with all sorts of flowers.
Wait, wax castle covered in flowers?
Yes. Primroses, strawberry flowers, Alexander buds, violets, and more.
That's incredible.
And it gets even more elaborate. There was a wax tree in the middle of the castle.
Wow.
And little statues on the towers that were made to pour out oil and vinegar as dressing.
That sounds less like a salad and more like an elaborate centerpiece for a royal banquet.
That's exactly what it was. And the author of the cookbook, William Resi,
Okay.
he even wrote a prologue comparing Charles II's return to the sun returning to England. It's a clear message of rebirth and hope.
So it wasn't just a fancy dish. It was about using food as a powerful symbol of the restored monarchy and a positive future for England.
Yes, exactly. Food wasn't just for eating. It was a way to express complex emotions, cultural values, and political allegiances. And flowers, with their beauty and symbolism, were a key part of this culinary theater.
It makes you appreciate the artistry that went into those royal feasts.
Absolutely. But it's important to remember that not everyone was celebrating Charles II's return.
Right.
Some people stayed loyal to the Protectorate, the government that had ruled under Oliver Cromwell.
That's true. So how did these different viewpoints show up, especially when it came to this newfound love for flowers?
Well, there's a satirical recipe from a few years later that claims to be from the kitchen of Oliver Cromwell's wife, Elizabeth.
Interesting.
It's a stark contrast to that fancy floral salad we just talked about.
Tell me more about this Cromwellian salad.
Instead of pretty flowers, this salad is garnished with bones.
Bones. That's a bit morbid.
It was meant to be a dark and satirical commentary on the politics of the time.
Okay.
The bones symbolized the death of the protectorate and the austere values it represented.
So it's the opposite of the flowers, which represented the monarchy flourishing and a return to a more extravagant way of life.
Exactly. It shows how food could be used not just to celebrate, but also to criticize the status quo, to express disagreement, even mockery. Even something as simple as a salad could become a battleground for different ideologies.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from the symbolic power of the Tudor rose to the practical uses of flowers in food and medicine, and now their role in expressing political views. It's amazing how much we can learn about a society just by looking at its relationship with something as seemingly simple as a flower.
It really is. It shows how powerful nature is.
Yeah?
It inspires us, influences us, even divides us.
It makes you wonder how we relate to flowers today. Have they lost their symbolic meaning in our modern world?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore further when we come back for the final part of our deep dive. Stay with us.
And we're back, continuing our deep dive into the fascinating world of flowers in Tudor and Stuart England.
Yes, we've explored their symbolism, their practical uses, even how they were used in political satire.
It's been quite a journey. But before we finish up, I'm curious about one more thing. We talked about how Charles II used flowers to symbolize the restoration of the monarchy.
Right.
But did that go beyond just the dining table?
Oh, definitely. A great example is this painting from the 1670s. It hangs in Windsor Castle.
So what's in the painting?
It's a grand dining room, like the one Charles II would have used for his fancy feasts.
I see.
But instead of courtiers, it's full of figures from classical mythology.
Oh, wow.
Zeus, Hera, and even Flora, the Roman goddess of flowers.
So where do the flowers come in?
Well, Flora, the flower goddess, is the main figure.
Okay.
She's pointing to these beautiful bunches of flowers that are being lowered from the ceiling towards the diners below.
Like a divine blessing on the feast with flowers.
Exactly. And the key thing is where this painting is. It's on the ceiling, right above where Charles II would have eaten.
So everyone eating in that room would be looking up at this scene with the goddess of flowers showering them with blessings.
Exactly. It's a subtle but powerful message.
Yeah.
You know, it connects Charles II with divine favor, like the restoration of the monarchy was meant to be not just a political event.
Wow, that's amazing. Art, mythology, and politics all mixed together and all about the power of flowers.
And it shows how much they were influenced by classical imagery and symbolism back then in Tudor and Stuart England.
Right.
They looked to the ancient world for models of power and authority, so using those themes in their art and architecture was a way to make their own rule seem more legitimate.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. I'm seeing flowers in a totally different way now.
Me too. It's amazing how something as simple as a flower can have so much meaning and history packed into it.
So as we wrap up this exploration, I have to ask, what does all this mean for us today? Do flowers still have that symbolic power in our modern world?
That's a good question. We might not use flowers in the exact same way as they did back in Tudor and Stuart times.
True.
But they definitely still have cultural meaning for us. Think about roses for Valentine's Day, lilies for funerals, even just bringing flowers to a dinner party.
That's true. We still use flowers to show how we feel, to mark special occasions, and yeah, sometimes even as a status symbol. I'm looking at my houseplants a little differently now.
Yeah. And it's worth thinking about how our desire for exotic flowers still shapes the global flower trade today.
Yeah.
It's a huge industry that brings beauty and joy to many, but it also has its downsides, often with social and environmental impacts.
It's a complicated legacy for sure. But I think the main takeaway is that flowers are more than just pretty things to look at. They're living symbols, full of history, culture, and meaning.
Absolutely. That's worth remembering the next time you see a flower, whether it's in your garden, at the store, or in a painting.
Well said. So here's something to think about. Take a look at the flowers around you. What stories do they tell about us, our values, and our relationship with nature? And if you enjoyed this deep dive into flower culture, make sure to subscribe for more explorations into the past.
Until next time, keep exploring.